In the small, isolated village of Ravenswood, nestled deep within the Blackwood forest, an ancient curse lingered, casting a shadow over its inhabitants. The villagers spoke in hushed whispers of the creatures of the night, a malevolent force that had haunted their ancestors for centuries. Each night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon bathed the forest in an eerie glow, the terror began. The village itself was a collection of dilapidated cottages, their once vibrant facades now faded and crumbling. The streets, narrow and winding, were shrouded in a perpetual fog that seemed to seep from the forest itself. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the occasional waft of something metallic and unsettling. One night, a chilling silence fell over Ravenswood, more profound than any before. The villagers, huddled in their homes, dared not venture outside. Their eyes, wide with fear, flickered to the windows and doors, barricaded against the horrors that prowled the night. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of old clocks, counting down the minutes to dawn. Among the villagers was Eleanor, a young woman with raven-black hair and eyes like pools of midnight. She had always felt a connection to the forest, an inexplicable pull that she tried to ignore. But that night, something was different. A voice, barely more than a whisper, called to her from the darkness. Unable to resist, Eleanor found herself standing at the edge of the forest, the mist curling around her ankles like ghostly tendrils. She stepped into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. The trees loomed above her, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare her. As she ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the sounds of the village faded into an oppressive silence. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, or at least what appeared to be one. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his skin was pallid and stretched taut over his bones. "Welcome, Eleanor," he said, his voice a guttural growl. "We've been waiting for you." Before she could respond, more figures emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing like the man's. They moved with a predatory grace, circling her, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger and malice. These were the creatures of the night, ancient beings that fed on the fear and blood of the living. Eleanor tried to run, but the forest seemed to close in around her. The creatures moved with inhuman speed, their laughter a cacophony of madness. She stumbled, falling to the ground, her hands scraping against the rough bark and jagged stones. One of the creatures lunged at her, its claws raking across her arm. She screamed, the sound echoing through the forest. The pain was intense, and she could feel the warmth of her blood as it trickled down her skin. The creature's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as it licked its claws, savoring the taste. Desperation gave Eleanor strength. She pushed herself to her feet and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together in her frantic flight. She could hear the creatures behind her, their footsteps a sinister rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Finally, she burst into a clearing, the moonlight illuminating a scene of horror. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, stained with the blood of countless victims. The ground was littered with bones, and the air was thick with the stench of death. The creatures surrounded her, their eyes glowing with anticipation. The leader, the man who had first spoken to her, stepped forward. "You cannot escape, Eleanor," he said. "You are one of us now." With a final, desperate scream, Eleanor was dragged to the altar. The creature's claws tore into her flesh, and the night was filled with the sound of her agony. The blood ritual began, the creatures chanting in a language long forgotten by humanity. As her life ebbed away, Eleanor realized the truth. She had always been destined to join the creatures of the night. The curse was in her blood, binding her to the darkness forever. The sun rose over Ravenswood, but the village remained silent. The villagers knew that the creatures of the night had claimed another victim. They huddled in their homes, praying for the curse to end, knowing that the darkness would return once more. The story of Eleanor and the creatures of the night would be whispered among the villagers for generations, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of the forest, waiting for the next soul to fall into their grasp. As the first light of dawn pierced the dense canopy of blackwood forest, the creatures retreated into the shadows, their hunger sated for another night. The villagers of Ravenswood emerged cautiously from their homes, their faces pale and drawn. They gathered in the village square, exchanging fearful glances, knowing that another of their own had been lost to the darkness. In the heart of the forest, the ancient stone altar lay empty, its gruesome purpose fulfilled. The clearing, once filled with the echoes of Eleanor's screams, was now silent. The creatures had returned to their hidden lairs, where they would slumber until the next nightfall. But something was different this time. Eleanor's blood, mingled with the ancient runes carved into the altar, had awakened something deep within the forest. A presence stirred, ancient and powerful, sensing the disruption. The ground beneath the altar trembled, and the air grew thick with a palpable malevolence. Back in the village, Father Gregory, the village priest, sensed the disturbance. He had long suspected that the curse that plagued Ravenswood was more than just the work of malevolent spirits. He believed it was tied to something far older and more sinister. With grim determination, he decided to venture into the forest and confront the evil that had claimed so many lives. Gathering a small group of the bravest villagers, including the blacksmith Thomas and the healer Agnes, Father Gregory prepared for the perilous journey. Armed with torches, holy symbols, and an assortment of weapons, they set off into the forest, their hearts heavy with fear but resolute in their mission. As they entered the forest, the fog thickened, swallowing the light from their torches. The air was eerily silent, and every snap of a twig underfoot made them jump. They followed the faint trail of blood that led them deeper into the woods, toward the ancient clearing. Hours passed as they navigated the labyrinthine forest. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of their eyes, and the oppressive sense of being watched grew stronger with each step. Finally, they reached the clearing, the sight of the blood-stained altar sending a shiver down their spines. Father Gregory approached the altar cautiously, muttering prayers under his breath. As he examined the runes, a sudden gust of wind extinguished their torches, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they struggled to relight them, the oppressive silence broken only by their frantic whispers. A low growl emanated from the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The creatures were returning, drawn by the scent of fresh blood and the presence of intruders. The villagers formed a tight circle, weapons at the ready, as glowing eyes appeared in the shadows, watching them with predatory intent. Father Gregory held up his crucifix, its silver surface glinting faintly in the dim light. "Begone, foul creatures," he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "In the name of the Lord, I banish you." The creatures hesitated, their growls growing louder. But before they could attack, a deafening roar shook the clearing. The ground split open, and a colossal figure emerged from the earth. A monstrous entity of twisted roots and soil, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. This was the true heart of the curse, the ancient evil that had awakened. The villagers stared in horror as the entity loomed above them. It reached out with massive, gnarled hands, intent on crushing them. Father Gregory recited prayers, hoping to weaken the creature, but its power was overwhelming. Thomas, the blacksmith, swung his hammer at one of the creature's hands, but it was like striking stone. The creature roared in anger, swatting him aside like a rag doll. Agnes, the healer, tried to use her knowledge of herbs and potions to craft a weapon, but there was no time. In the midst of the chaos, Eleanor's spirit appeared, her ethereal form glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. She hovered above the altar, her eyes filled with sorrow and determination. "You must destroy the altar," she cried, her voice echoing through the clearing. "It is the source of its power." Father Gregory, understanding the significance of her words, rushed to the altar. With a desperate prayer, he smashed the stone with his crucifix, shattering the ancient runes. The ground shook violently, and the monstrous entity let out a final, ear-piercing roar before collapsing into a heap of roots and earth. The glowing eyes of the creatures faded, and they retreated into the shadows, their connection to the ancient evil severed. The forest fell silent once more, the oppressive weight lifting as the curse was finally broken. The villagers, battered and bruised but alive, helped each other back to Ravenswood. The village, though scarred by the horrors it had endured, began to heal. Father Gregory and the others shared their story, and Eleanor's sacrifice became a legend, a symbol of hope and resilience. Yet, deep within the forest, a faint whisper lingered, a reminder that ancient evils never truly die. The villagers of Ravenswood knew that they must remain vigilant, for the creatures of the night might one day rise again, hungering for blood and vengeance. The villagers of Ravenswood returned home, each step heavy with exhaustion and relief. Father Gregory led them back, his mind racing with the events that had transpired. The forest, now eerily calm, seemed to watch them go, as if acknowledging their victory. Eleanor's spirit had saved them, but the memory of her sacrifice would forever be etched in their hearts. Over the following days, Ravenswood slowly began to heal. The villagers, though scarred by the horrors they had faced, came together to rebuild their lives. The once decaying cottages were repaired, and the village square, previously a place of fear and mourning, became a hub of activity and hope. Father Gregory took it upon himself to document the events, inscribing the tale in the village's ancient chronicle. He wanted to ensure that future generations would know the truth about the creatures of the night and the brave souls who had fought against them. The chronicle would serve as both a warning and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Thomas, the blacksmith, and Agnes, the healer, found themselves growing closer in the aftermath of the ordeal. Their shared experience forged a bond that blossomed into love. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure the village was well prepared should the darkness ever return. Thomas crafted stronger weapons, while Agnes concocted new protective charms and potions. Despite the sense of normalcy returning, a lingering unease persisted. The villagers knew that the ancient evil, though defeated, might one day stir again. They took precautions, establishing watchmen to patrol the forest's edge each night and reinforcing the village's defenses. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep, blood red, Father Gregory stood at the edge of the forest, the events of that fateful night replaying in his mind. He prayed silently, asking for guidance and protection for his people. The forest remained silent, but the sense of a watching presence never fully dissipated. Years passed, and Ravenswood flourished. The village grew, new families arrived, and the memory of the creatures of the night began to fade into legend. The villagers celebrated their resilience with an annual festival, honoring Eleanor and the brave souls who had fought to free them from the curse. One such festival evening, as the villagers danced and sang under the starlit sky, a faint rustling was heard from the edge of the forest. The music paused, and all eyes turned toward the sound. The watchman, ever vigilant, stepped forward, weapons ready. But it was not a creature that emerged from the shadows. Instead, a young girl, no older than 10, stepped into the light. Her eyes, wide with fear, reflected the flames of the bonfire. She was clad in torn rags, her face dirty and tear-streaked. Father Gregory approached her gently. "Child, what brings you here?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a terror that seemed far too old for her years. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The darkness is coming back." The villagers exchanged worried glances. Father Gregory knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "We will protect you," he promised. "We will protect us all." The festival ended abruptly as the villagers prepared for the unknown threat. The sense of unity and purpose that had brought them through the last ordeal now galvanized them once more. They fortified the village, gathered their weapons, and prepared for whatever might come. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the horizon, Father Gregory led a group to the forest's edge. They stood in silent vigil, waiting for the darkness they knew would eventually return. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of a growl. The creatures of the night had been vanquished, but the villagers of Ravenswood understood the eternal nature of their struggle. They had learned to live with the shadows, to fight back against the night. And as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the land, They stood ready to face whatever darkness the future might bring. In Ravenswood, the fight against the darkness would never truly end, but neither would their resolve. They had become more than just survivors. They were guardians, forever vigilant, protecting their home against the terrors of the night. The legend of their courage and resilience would echo through the ages, a beacon of hope against the encroaching dark.